Hello. I've thought about how best to convey all of the recent updates that have occurred within Jackrabbit Relay lately. Whether it should be one single video that has everything, or a series of smaller videos that focus on particular aspects. And I felt the best way to deal with some of this was just in smaller videos that focus on very specific aspects. Simply because the math in some cases can be quite daunting, and the differences from traditional thinking is enough to warrant a separate and complete video on the topic. This is one particular video where I'm going to talk about Relay's enhanced PCT tables or percent tables. When you place an order within your exchange, Relay gives you the ability to specify a percentage of your balance. The most recent update gives you a lot of choices. 1% of your balance has really three different meanings. You can either base your 1% of your balance on your base currency or your quote currency, or just the raw balance as it is at the moment of the trade, meaning the percent table is actually disabled. The purpose of the percent table is to provide a budget management assistance based upon the information you give Relay through your take profit and your deviation. It calculates a position size over the course of whatever positions you stipulated. For the purposes of this example and discussion, I'm going to keep it to 100 positions. That way the math is simple. So if you go to purchase ADA USDT, then the program will look to calculate your volume at 100 positions. Now for this example, I'm actually going to use BTC for the numbers because they're more dramatic and more pronounced. Seeing numbers of 40,000 and 1% of 40,000 versus 1% of $1 and some change. The 40,000 makes the math a little easier and a little more visual. So the purposes of the number are going to be on the basis of BTC. So as you can see here in the table, column A is the projected price of the asset. Column B is your budget or your account balance. Now I'm going to go through each of these types one by one. So I'm going to start with the base currency volume, or the traditional way that Jackrabbit Relay managed percentages. Now you see on C2, USD with a 1% B. This is what you would use within your order connections or order payload to specifically reference base volume usage. Now this is the default, so if you leave the B off, the system automatically assumes its previous behavior. So with base volume, your base value always remains the same. In this case, 0.0025. So no matter what the price does with the asset, the base amount of what you are purchasing is going to remain the same always. The consequences of that is that the volume of the quote currency is going to depreciate or go down in value as the price drops. As you can see in column D, 1% of each balance level shows the volume dropping 1% of the quote currency, even though the base currency volume is consistent. So now let's move on to the quote currency. Quote currency volume on the right side of the pair. This is where you want your quote volume. In the case of the example, USDT, to remain consistent at no matter what. So there's consistency at a specific value. So in the case of the budget, no matter what, the starting budget is $10,000. Therefore, the quote currency volume of that entire trade cycle needs to be $100 per position. And both of these, base currency volume and quote currency volume, maintain these for the life of the trade cycle. So for quote currency volume, you can see column F that the value of the quote currency is consistent at all times. But column E, the base amount, appreciates or goes up over time. The differences between base currency volume and quote currency volume are really a matter of risk management. Each has its place, and one isn't better than the other. It's just a matter of how you look at your risk and what you are trying to achieve. Each has its place as well. But finally, sometimes you don't want the system to manage the budget for you at all. So Jackrabbit Relay has a way to override the entire process. And this can go in either the order, which will override the percentage table only for that order, or it can go into your exchange configuration, which will override all trades on that exchange and that sub-account. Here you see both the base and quote currency volumes changing, because for the purposes of this example, 1% of the budget is calculated each and every time the trade takes place, not just at the start of the trade cycles. So you see the base currency volume goes up in value and the quote currency volume goes down in value. Now the irony of this process is that it will theoretically remain consistent just like the other two. But over a long trading range or a long trade cycle, there will be some differences, just like there are differences between base currency volume and quote currency volume. How those differences impact your trading depends upon what you are trying to achieve. And of course, putting these in examples is pretty easy. On row 16 and 17, base currency volume association. Now for these, I'm using ADA for the example, but of course it works with any coin you want. Now I'm using USD as the driving force of this process, but you can use base or quote, and the mathematics will translate appropriately to each context. Though I don't necessarily recommend it, because trying to follow a quote currency volume on base currency transformations can be quite difficult, along with the vice versa approach. So you have here 16 and 17 shows your payload in relation to base currency volume. 19 shows the payload in relation to quote currency volume. 21 shows the payload in relation to quote currency volume, but the percentage table is disabled. Note, you can also use the percentage table being disabled on base currency volume. When you disable the percentage table, using base currency volume or quote currency volume is technically irrelevant because they both work out the same thing at the first position of the trade cycle. And from the standpoint of the mathematics, the override treats everything as the first position of a cycle, even if you are at position 50 or 60 within that cycle, because of the calculations of recalculating your percentage at the point of purchase or sell. And that brings up the biggest issue here. All of these statements are buy statements, but for the percent table to work properly, your percentage assessment must also be in your closing statement. Jackrabbit's minimalist thinking means you must tell it what to do. It just doesn't assume later on down the line to check the percentage tables. You must explicitly tell it to check the percentage tables. So your percentage reference must be in both your buys and your sells or closes. Now let's talk a little bit about when or how you would use each of these formats. The override is actually easiest here because it simply means you don't want Relay helping you manage the budget. You want to manage your budget at your own risks no matter what happens. You want full control, and you want it as a immediate, right then and there calculation based upon your current budget. This type of approach is good if you're doing routine deposits and your budget is always changing, because then the percentages will change as rapidly and dynamically as your budget. Both base volume and quote volumes only change at the beginning of the trade cycle. So if you make a deposit, the deposit will not be recognized until the next trade cycle. There is good and bad about that process. The good is that for your recipe, it's consistent in the levels of accumulation. The bad is that it won't recognize any enhanced budgets that would provide better profitability. Now let's talk about when to use quote base versus quote. Base volumes or base quote currency volumes are typically used for grid trading or scalping contexts where the base currency levels need to be very specific to accomplish what you are trying to do within a very aggressive high trading format. I say typical, but that is not always, and there are always exceptions to the trading method. Nothing in trading is set in stone. Quote volumes or quote currency volumes are typically used with common trading algorithms such as MACD or Bollinger's, or any technical analysis where you want a accumulation cycle and then at some point you want to close out the position. That one factor there, closing out the position, is a difference really between when you use base currency volume versus quote currency volume. A lot of times people will use base currency volume when they're not closing the position but only selling fragments of it. Again, it's a strategy and technique specific to a particular purpose. And it doesn't always have to be a specific direction all the time. All three principles work technically the same. The only difference between all three of them is the mechanical and mathematical approach. That is the most important factor about all three of these. One is not better than the other. They are technically equal. And the end result, through the law of averages, produces pretty much the same thing. You will have differences, but from what I have seen mathematically, I don't believe they are enough to really advocate one approach over another as a consistent basis, versus just using each approach appropriate to the situation you are in. So as you can see, this process is very easy and it really does work very well for whatever principle you want to trade on. Let me know if you have any questions. You can leave them in the comments below or on the support server. If you're not subscribed, subscribe for future updates. Share this video so helping others to understand the difference in the mathematics. Until next time.